How's that look? Thank you all for coming. And for you people who may be watching on 533, or you people who may someday watch it on YouTube. So I will say that I don't have any introduction. Just look at the first screen there, and you will see who I am and a few things. So I want to run through this presentation rather quickly to leave room for all of your hundreds of questions. Okay? And I'll just hobble back over here. And so we know Napoleon. Perhaps you know this great artist, David, who did a lot of paintings of him. That's just one of them. And so we'll get moving. Oops, not that fast. That's too fast. Okay, Napoleon was not French, really. He was born 1 year after France annexed Corsica. Corsica had been Italian of some sort for centuries. So when Napoleon was born, he spoke a kind of Italian. Now, there was no Italy, so he spoke a kind of dialect that was in the Genoa area. When he went to France at 9 years old, he knew no French, so he had to learn it. That's part of his problem. He always felt a little, shy about his language. At 9 years old, sent to a military school and learned French. His native language was, as I say, some sort of Italian. Voracious reader. Now, a lot of people don't know that, and that may surprise some people. I wrote some of my friends who read a lot about his voraciousness. When he was in school, he had an allowance for lunch and food, and he spent most of it on books. That's a little bit unusual. You didn't know that, probably. He read all the time, voraciously, on any topic, but primarily history, ancient history, law, politics, etc. So much so that we'll see how this affected his behavior later. Now, well, I see 30,000 letters that he wrote during his few years. So he was a voracious writer. He tried his hand at writing, literature, but most literature figures of the day said it probably shouldn't have been doing that. You have to get a little background. He was born 20 years before the French Revolution. So he was born in 69. Here it is, 89. And we all know about Marie Antoinette and let them eat cake, remember? There wasn't enough bread. That's not true, but it's a nice story. There was a bread shortage for the year or two before. It was so bad in 89 that people were starving. They were panicking. And you had a run on Versailles, mainly by just poor Parisian women. So the revolution didn't start necessarily by intellectual thought. It started because people were starving. That's a better time for a revolution, especially in the middle of the summer. Now, we have an interesting thing in that military needed to be controlled in Paris, and so our good friend General Lafayette, who was an aristocrat and was part of a group that was meeting, but he turned out to be the leader of the French military in Paris. So we have Lafayette involved. We'll see something interesting in a few minutes. So there's July 14 in 1789. I happened to be there 200 years later at a great celebration in 19, or not, it couldn't have been 18, could it? I know people think I lived that far back, but 1789, so 1989. So he's 20 years old, and here's this Bastille, and people rioted, and they knew that there were guns in there, and they thought gunpowder. So they tore it down, rioted, set loose the prisoners. There were 7 or 8 political prisoners. It had been a major prison, but it wasn't really any longer. There's a lot of stories that you can tell about the Bastille, but one interesting thing is within another day after it was rioted and the prisoners were released, entrepreneurs been tearing down all the stones. Why were they tearing down all the stones? To make souvenirs. Souvenirs are a great thing. Now, as a matter of fact, that's a French word, right? Anyway, so look at old Lafayette here. He got himself a hand on one of the keys that opened cells in the place, and he sent a key to George Washington. And George Washington doesn't have it anymore. It's in the Smithsonian. But you can see a key from the Bastille if you wanted to. So there he is, Paris. Oh, Louis the 16th, you know, was brought into Paris under military, and they put him in a palace called the Tuileries Palace. Now, you don't know about the Tuileries because it's not there anymore, but there is a garden. If you've been to Paris, you've walked through probably the Tuileries Garden. But there was a palace there, and he was put in it sort of in house arrest. But then he tried to flee Paris, and in disguise as a bourgeois, and he got caught just before he passed cross the border into what would become Germany someday. It wasn't at that time, and that meant that he could be accused of treason, leaving the country, and so he was tried, and after a day or two of argument, they sent him to the guillotine. So he becomes the only French king ever guillotined or had his head chopped off.
Where was Napoleon?
Pardon me?
Where was Napoleon at this time?
Where was Napoleon? Napoleon is this young kid who's been taken into the military. He's been an artillery, he learned artillery. So he's involved in some of this early fighting, and we'll see what happens. He's only 20 at this point, but he's going to move fast. Once Louis has been guillotined in 72, they declare that the country is a republic. Before that, they were trying to make it a constitutional monarchy, but Louis tried to flee and didn't want any part of being a constitutional monarch. He wanted to bring the nobles back. I could talk 5 hours just on the revolution, so I'm just skirting through it. It's a very complicated thing, but they did declare once he was guillotined a republic. Now, the French left wing were so adamant that they wanted to uproot everything that had been part of the old regime. Déraciner, as the French call it, uproot it, literally. So they said, we're going to get rid of the calendar. We're no longer going to call things lundi, mardi, mercredi, and so on. We're going to call it something else. We're going to have not 7 days of the week, but 10. We're going to change the months of a year. We're no longer going to have janvier, février, mars, avril, etc. We're going to have months that are named after the climate or what's going on. So you're going to have Brumaire, which is a foggy month. You're going to have something else if it's hot, and so on. And so they had named all the months different. Got the metric system. I mean, it's just, I'm sorry you can't hear all that. So we're going to have to move on. But in 92, they're being invaded. France, now it's a republic, is being invaded by every monarch that can find anybody to put in their mercenary group, plus the nobles who have fled. So everybody's coming in. We can't stand to have a non-monarchy on our borders. We're going to go in and destroy these republicans and put somebody back on the throne. Okay, so most people think, well, the French went out and started trying to conquer all these people. They were defending their land. So back here, I've got somebody who's going to talk to us about that in a moment. Let's see where that is. Okay, there we are. In 92, we have, where'd he go? Up, boy, up. You're sleeping on the job.
No, I was listening.
Oh.
That's unusual for me.
I understand. You're supposed to, the Marseillaise, we have somebody, where's Bill Andrus? He can sing it. Well, anyway, I'm not going to sing it because it wouldn't help any, I don't think. But I'm going to say the first bar or two, and don't tell me that you haven't been in the bar, because I know you know the song. So it starts out, Allons enfants de la patrie. Let us go, children of the fatherland. Allons enfants de la patrie. Okay. Nous de la tyrannie, les solons sont en da 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 da. I hope that doesn't have a sound on it. Yeah. Allons, enfants de la patrie, sonnez le bataillon, marchons, marchons. Qu'un sang impur above an ocean. It's kind of a bloody thing. Go one more time, couple bars. So here it is in English. Have you read it? Have you looked at it? That's the English up there, or my version of the English. That's a little bit bloodier than our national anthem. They're coming to slay our sons and our companions. To arms, citizens, marchons, armons. So you have a citizens' army, a citizens' army. Now, most of the leaders, generals and colonels and all that, they're gone. There were nobles. Their parents paid for them to be military leaders. So people like Napoleon just went, they filled up the vacuum. So when he was 23 years old, he became a brigadier general. That means he could have a brigade under his control, which meant several regiments, Plus he had been trained in artillery. So we're going to see what happens. We're going to get rid of that impure blood that's messing up our land, So here we go. Now, that meant that there's coalitions of countries who said, okay, we've had it with France. At one time, or not all at once, except maybe at Waterloo, but Austria, which is a huge Austro-Hungarian. You may have seen that map just back there, just a little, see where the map is. There, take a look at the Austrian Empire there on that map. There is no Germany, but there is a Prussian, Pan-Prussia, the Prussians are going to be coming later with Bismarck, you know, and unifying the land, 300 and something little principalities. So Germany does not become Germany until 1870. So we've got over 100 years. But now look at the Russian Empire, okay? And then, you know, Great Britain, Sweden and Normandy, Spain. Look at France is surrounded by all those countries. And so Austria, Russia, Prussia, Spain, Portugal, Sweden, and Britain, that all at one time or another are trying to destroy France, okay? Now, Napoleon is a genius. I know you don't really probably think that, but militarily, he could almost remember every military campaign he'd ever read. He almost had total recall. So he knew tactics up one side and the other. He also knew that you should divide your army, divide it into sections, what it would be called corps. Now, when the Civil War was fought, they studied Napoleonic tactics. Civil War was fought primarily by Napoleonic rules. But if you go to the U.S. Military Academy, you would still read some things about Napoleon's tactics, especially as concerns artillery. Well, so you integrate artillery, cavalry, and infantry. You divide the army into corps so they can move and maneuver rapidly rather than having to worry with the whole army. So you can maneuver back behind them, what the French call maneuver derrière. So, and derrière in the sense of behind, not just any behind. So anyway, logistics. Napoleon decided, why would you have wagon trains following you all over Europe trying to victual your troops and bring in ammunition? Why don't you just forage? Just forage off the land. And that's, of course, what happened in the Civil War, is for as long as there was anything to forage, eventually there wasn't. Now, he would, if the guys were firing artillery and need help, he'd jump in and do it. He didn't mind, he didn't feel himself, not at this point, any greater than the soldiers. Now, his ego does get away with him, as you might expect. Look down at the bottom. His guys loved him so much that they would be wounded. Instead of going back home, they, as soon as they were capable, back into the army to fight with Napoleon. There was one guy named Nicolas Chauvin. Nicolas Chauvin was wounded 9 different times. Seriously, 9 different times. Every time they said, go back home. No, I want to fight with Napoleon. So he did that. So we get a word in our language called chauvinism. Okay? Okay, so Nicolas Chauvin. Now, Napoleon, he's now 22, 23, 24, 25. He's a brigadier general. He's sent down to Toulon. It's on the Riviera, now near Marseille, and it's held by the British. And the orders that he gets from the government is, go down there and release the siege of Toulon. The British are all around it. We want you to lift the siege. He does, with his military tactics and his artillery. So he got 1 horse shot out from under him and 1 bayonet wound, but he's like Chauvin, you know, he's back on the horse and off he goes. So that became his first really great example of leadership, and they're already looking at him as a great hero. But then the outfit that's running the country, and we'll get to that in a minute, they sent him down to Italy, thinking maybe he'd get himself killed down there, and they'd get rid of him. They were a little bit worried about him being too good. But he marched across the Alps, okay, to come into Italy unsuspectedly. Now, 2 other people have done that. Well, 3 if you want to count Julius Caesar. But Hannibal, you can't see. Hannibal and who else? Oh, you guessed it. Oh, okay. Charlemagne. Okay, so both of those, Hannibal with his elephants and Charlemagne without elephants, but they all came across the Alps to try and get into there's no Italy still, of course, so into Lombardy. When think of Milan, for example, think of, say, Venice, think of Pisa, something like that. Anyway, so he marches across, and the Italians own that. They've owned northern Italy for centuries now, the Austrian-Hungarian. But he chases them out of Italy, or out of Lombardy, at the Battle of Lodi, and establishes an independent republic in the Piedmont, that is just below the Alps. And that's when they say, okay, we got a guy on our hands. We got a real genius. The Reign of Terror is just coming out, and you've heard of Robespierre, you've heard of the Reign of Terror. That's part of the French Revolution, probably. If you haven't, well, the Reign of Terror was when guillotine got to prove that you could put heads off by the thousands. The guillotine went full speed in every town in France, and there were hundreds of thousands of people guillotined. And we could talk about who these people were, but we won't do it. But basically, the Republic outlawed religion. So a lot of the priests, went underground. Well, I don't want to get into that. Okay, so now that Robespierre has his head cut off in 94, there's a 5-man, they said, oh, we don't want one man ruling anymore. No more one man ruling. So what you get is 5 men, as though this would be a safe kind of thing. Reminds you a little bit of the Troika in Russia. Or maybe it doesn't, but anyway. So this is getting heavy. What is that doing up there? Oh, Goethe. Does everybody know Goethe? Johann von Goethe, when the French won their battle against the invaders in 92, he says, in the German, of course, this is a new day, the most important day of the century. We have come to destroy monarchy. Okay? Have you ever read anything by Goethe? Faust, for example? Maybe somebody's read Faust, probably. Not that you're going to remember it, but anyway. So, move on. Allons enfants. Okay, so here we got this 5-man. Well, that's the Reign of Terror. Hundreds of... 1973? That's my first error. I got a hat that says, I could be wrong, but it's highly unlikely. But anyway, so 1873, this 5-man group is called the Directoire, okay? So that was 5 years that they had those guys running things. Most of the time, Napoleon was elsewhere. Napoleon was taking on his job, but he did meet Josephine. Now her name, that was his nickname for her. Her name was Marie Joseph. She was from Martinique. And her husband, she was forced to marry at age 15, an aristocrat named Beauharnais, or Good Harness in English, Beauharnais. Okay, so she's married, she has 2 children, and 7 years older than Napoleon, but he was fascinated by Josephine, She not so much fascinated with him, but she liked him because he meant power. You know, power is the best aphrodisiac. But that didn't stop her from having lots of other lovers, which really teed off Napoleon. So he went around and had a lot of mistresses, but so they, you know, it all equated. But he wrote her every day during those 5 years. Okay, so the directory sent Napoleon to Egypt. Now, why would you want to send one of your generals to Egypt? Because the British had Egypt, and you want to aggravate the British as much as possible, and if possible, you'd like to destroy the British. So he goes into Egypt and wins a lot of battles, and you know what the British did? They sent Lord Nelson. Lord Nelson comes down and destroys the whole the whole navy. There's Napoleon without a navy to get back to France. But there are horses left, so off he goes eventually back to Paris from Egypt. Now, he had several battles, a battle in Cairo. He had another one at the pyramids. There's somebody painted him. Whoops, where did he go? That's somebody's painting of him standing looking at the Sphinx. I don't know that he ever did that, but anyway.
Did he shoot the nose off the pyramid?
Somebody had already shot it off. Look, his nose is gone, right? Well, when he came to Egypt, he brought 167 scientists. Now, why would he bring scientists to Egypt? Because Egypt was fascinating to the Western Europeans. They knew almost nothing about it. It had been under Arab control, and they knew that there was a great culture in Egypt. They knew that there were all sorts of archaeological ruins in Egypt. They knew other things. So he brought with him 167 savants, was the word used in French. Some of them were scientists, some were historians, some of them were literary figures, some of them were journalists, and so on. So he comes with it. And he brought 300 books with him. That was going to be his, an evening reading, I mean, you might laugh, but he speed read, so he could read a lot of books. But they were actually books about such things as Arab civilization. He read the translation of the Quran. He got into debates with some of the imam. I mean, he's no fool, despite his reputation. So he won the battles of the Pyrenees. He went up into Syria and had a battle in Acre, won that one, came back down, and so he had all these savants who started raiding art. Now, if you go to the Louvre, some of you have been to the Louvre probably, there is a whole wing called the Egyptian wing. Where did he get all that stuff in the Egyptian ring? Came from Napoleon's army. Okay? So Egypt has always wanted it back, but, finders keepers. So the French will never give them any of it back. They call it requisitioning, but the Egyptians call it stealing. I don't know why, but they did. But there's one thing that the Brits got a hold of, and that's one French soldier found the Rosetta Stone. And it's in the British Museum, and the reason being that at some point the Brits, got hold of it, but they did take it back to Paris at first. But what's the importance of the Rosetta Stone? Can't hear you. Say it again. Okay, so Egyptian hieroglyphics had not been translated. Nobody could figure out what in the world that was about. But the Rosetta Stone had Greek, and it had, what was the other one? There's one other language. Maybe Sanskrit. Anyway, it was by using those two ancient languages, they could then decipher the hieroglyphics. So, you know, there's a company called the Rosetta Stone where you can learn, they teach different languages on the computer. If you ever wanted to learn, you know, Swahili or something, you can get it on the Rosetta Stone. I told you about Lord Nelson, the rascal, blowing up all of the ships. So here, the directory, these 5 men, this is 99, they're about to crumble. They're just, you know, the people are tired of them. And so Napoleon says, oh, what an idea. So he rushes back and helps overthrow the directory. And as he helped to overthrow it, he ended up in the 18 Brumaire, okay? That's the year 8 of 1798. I got that one right. Year 8. Why is that? Because in 91 and 92, when they're redoing the calendar, they said, we're not going to talk about the old way of naming months and years, so we're going to start with year 1. So here we are in year 8, and we're in the 18th day of November, which is Brumaire. Why? Because that means foggy. So there's a new government then, once that directory is overthrown. There are 3 men, okay? And it's called the consulate, or as we would say, the consul. And guess who's one of the 3? Napoleon. Not only is he one of the 3, but he's the head consul. So we might as well say he's an autocrat. He runs the country. Okay, so he's first consul, and as first consul, oh, there's David. Oh, why does he have his hand there? That's one of your questions, remember? Why does he have his hand there? Has he got heartburn? Come on.
He kept his cell phone in there.
He's, gee, I've always wondered what the cell phone. Come on. Who knows? I did. I told you. And what did I tell you?
He told us that the Greeks used to wear togas and they held them like that, and he was impressed with the Greeks.
Romans.
He wanted to emulate the Greeks.
Romans, but that's okay. Romans wore togas. Now, a toga is a whole mess of long stuff, and so when they're walking around in the slop, they grab those and throw them over their arm like that, okay? So they're walking around, and you'll see statue after statue, painting after painting, and they're like this. Well, put that out of the way. But anyway, this hand is, they're holding it like this, okay? Now, Napoleon so worshipped the Romans that he got into the habit of sticking that in his vest, his hand like that, to emulate the Romans. He did not have, you know, stomach ache or whatever. Over on the right is that's just a beautiful picture, isn't it? David, they call him a neo classic, but I think he's a romantic. A romantic. You can't paint like that unless you're a romantic. And this is the age of romanticism. Goethe, he's a romantic, right? Well, come on. So now he's first consul. What's he going to do? He says, there is no laws in France. There are no laws. Every little city and village has a law, but there's no unified law in the country. Why? Because if you got a monarch, you don't need laws. They just dictate. So there's no laws. He says, we need laws. Well, he knew law pretty well. He'd read every law book there was from Hammurabi on down. So he writes the code of laws. He had help. I mean, he had guys that were working with him, but he dictated it basically. And behind all of that is equality before the law, okay, equal taxation, educational system. There's no educational system. So he starts out, every village will have an elementary school, okay? Every larger commune will have a lycée, which is like a high school, but it's patterned after the Roman lyceum, okay? So there we have, and when I was first studying French in the school system and was over there, that's what people were going into, the lycée. And they had a baccalaureate, okay, coming right out of that Napoleonic period. You had to pass the baccalaureate to get out of high school and to get in college. All of this is set up by Napoleon, ladies and gentlemen. That's all written and started by him. Not only did he do that, but he created the universities and something called high schools, grandes écoles. Now, grandes écoles are the top notch, beyond the university. They train engineers, civil servants, everybody who's ever been in the cabinet, everybody who's ever been president of France has gone through the Grande École to study how to be an administrator, okay? So anyway, including Macron, by the way. So there you have it. He also created a Bank of France, okay, and set up a new monetary system, promoted construction. Well, I mean, I could spend, well, we used to spend 45 hours on this in the university. In the graduate course, you'd spend 45 hours. We're going to do 40 minutes, right? So naturally, we're kind of going right over. There's a copy of the old text of the Code Civil. You go to a bookstore today in Paris, you go into a store and you say, I'd like to have the Napoleonic Code, please. They'll be happy to sell. It's about that thick because year after year after year it's amended. You know, there are lots of things that were not really something a 20th century person would be glad of, especially women, because he was a patriotic kind of guy. He didn't think women ought to do anything but have babies. So all that had to be redone. Remember, there's no religion. It's been outlawed. So Napoleon, while he's first consul, negotiates with the Vatican, and they decide, well, if we're ever going to unify France and quiet everybody down, we've got to bring back religion. So they have what's called the Concordat, which just simply means, concord means peace, right? So one of the things that they negotiated was, we've confiscated all the lands that belong to the church. We've confiscated all the land. We've taken away all of the nobles' land. We've taken the church land. We're not going to give any of it back, okay? We've already parceled it out to the poor people. Well, the bourgeoisie, people who could afford to buy it. So we're not going to return it. And not only that, but we're going to keep control of the church buildings. If you've ever been to France and you see the churches and you look at some of the stained glass that is in horrible condition, well, today it's mostly been cleaned up. I'm thinking the old days. You'd say to the priest or something, why don't you, good Catholic people, clean up these, why don't you get the stained glass cleaned up? And they say, we don't own it. We're not going to pay for it. The government owns the churches. Notre Dame, for example, Chartres, Amiens, all of them, all owned and still owned today by the government, okay? Well, so that's going to be maintained. But the one thing that really worked was peace with the Vatican and the Pope. This meant that he could bring the Pope back to France when he decides it's time to be emperor. Okay? So he got the Senate and the Tribunal, that's like Senate and the House of Representatives, to agree to establish an empire. He says, France is so important, we need to be an empire, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like the Russian Empire, etc. Why don't we have an empire? They all said, yay, yay, yay. Oh, no, they said, we. So, okay, so Napoleon said, okay, I'll be the emperor. So they put out a plebiscite, sent out a ballot to all the men, naturally, no women, but all the men. You can vote yes or no. We know Napoleon as emperor. Guess what they voted? We. 70% or more. So Napoleon was elected emperor. Okay? That's sort of like, Putin or somebody today. Aristocrats have a way of getting all the votes. But as the French would say, well, he deserved it. Right? Oh, Beethoven loved Napoleon until this point. He didn't much like him deciding to be an emperor. He was working on a symphony that was going to dedicate, right, Larry? And so when Napoleon declared himself emperor, Beethoven, who was very much a Republican, a democratic thinking guy, he admired him, and he said, but once he said that, Beethoven felt he'd been betrayed, so he named the symphony Eroica, and so it was no longer Napoleon Bonaparte. So that's Beethoven's take on it. Now, if you're going to be emperor, you got to get coronated. So there's David's painting. It's not very good. The painting is good, but my reproduction is about 5th generation, so it doesn't look so great. But you can see there in the middle, he's holding a crown. He's going to put it on the head of Josephine. What you don't see, and what David didn't do, is the Pope was supposed to put it on Napoleon's head. But he grabbed it out of the Pope's hand and put it on his own head. Why not? Because he didn't want to be responsible for the Pope. He's the emperor. Put the crown on your own head. But David didn't do that. But anyway, Napoleon creates something called a meritocracy. Before aristocracy, monarchy, all that, you rise based on your blood, right? You're an aristocrat, or you're a bourgeois, or you're a peasant, and you're always there. But for Napoleon, you need to be able to rise. That's what he's been doing, is rising. And not only that, but tons and tons of people are rising up. So he wants to illustrate this merit, and so he creates, I've already talked about the École and so on. He creates the Legion of Honor and the Palme Académique. Now, if you take a look at that one on the right, you want to go to my house, I'll show you one of those. Because unlike most Americans, the French like me well enough that the Prime Minister approved my being a Chevalier of the Ordre des Palmes Académiques, which simply means academic merit, okay? It's not a great deal. My daughters bow to me, but no, other people don't have to. So anyway, Napoleon fought 60 battles and lost 6. Now we know one of them that he lost, right? Everybody knows about Waterloo because everybody says, well, he reached his Waterloo. That's one of our little famous sayings. But look at some of the battles he did win. Rivoli, Lodi, Magenta, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. But look at this. Napoleon lost the Battle of Moscow. Now, why is he over there in Russia? He got carried away. His ego finally took over. He's won everything else. He's got all of Europe pacified. He's going to marry the daughter of the Austria-Hungarian king. The Prussians are minding their business. The Brits are staying out of the way now that Nelson has destroyed they're happy. So he's going off to Moscow. foraging on the way. He says, no problem. When I get to Moscow, I'll live off of Moscow. I'll take over and I'll live off of the food and victuals of Moscow. Well, the Tsar was smart, and he pulled the rug out of Napoleon. He says, we'll burn the place. So everybody leaves Moscow, and they set it on fire. What you going to do? You can't forage now. It's middle of winter. One of the coldest winters ever, 1812, 13. You've heard the overture to 1812, right? In the middle, toward the end of that, you hear da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and that's when Napoleon's army is marching along. And then you got the Tsarist anthem and so on, and you hear the clanging of at the end, the cannons are going off. Listen to that sometime, and you'll hear the French national anthem. Anyway, so there we have it. He lost the battle. That meant right in the dead of winter, nothing to eat, so he's got to head back as fast as he can to Paris. What happens? 600,000 men. How many of them get back? 10,000. Kev is not here. Where's Kev? I talked to Kev at lunch about it. They, in Lithuania, have many, many tombs of Napoleonic soldiers who died coming through their land on this march back. So I was hoping Kev could talk to you a bit about that. Anyway, there's some pictures of going through the snow and so on. Napoleon, of course, because of this, he's not a winner anymore. If you're not a winner, you lose. So they said, you have to abdicate. The French are tired of war, 1813, and so they sent him off to Ile d'Elbe. Ever heard of the little saying, able was I ere I saw Elba? One of those, what do you call those things where you can write it either way and it comes out the same? It's not coming. Able was I ere I saw Elba, supposedly Napoleon said, and you write it either way and it comes out the same. Yes, say it again. Oh, well, that'll go. There we go. We got somebody. Anyway, so what happens? Louis XVI had a younger brother who's been in exile in England. His name is Louis II. And, well, actually, it's Louis XVIII, not Louis II. Louis XVIII. What happened to Louis XVII? Well, he's in Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. That's where he was. Remember that? Coming down the river, old Huck and Jim, they meet these hucksters, and one of them is the Dauphin. Dauphin meaning the son of the king. But nobody knows, as we got a little answer back there in the back. But anyway, so this brother is, look at this guy, overfed and overfat, and no way he's going to run the country, okay? The idea of going back to a monarchy, nobody likes it. Most importantly, Napoleon doesn't like it. Ile d'Elbe is just off the coast of Italy. And he jumps on his boat, goes back to Italy, and pretty soon all of the Chauvin people, and they say, we'll join you. So as he trails up to Paris, he has thousands and thousands of men. He gets up to Paris, he gets more. And they say, well, there's Ile d'Elbe right there, right off of the coast there of what would be someday Italy. So his loyal follow him up to, guess where? Waterloo. And when he gets to Waterloo, there it is. Somebody had to, can you imagine trying to paint that? I can't, no matter how big your canvas. But anyway, the Battle of Waterloo. Okay, he lost it. Why did he lose it? Because he didn't have cell phones. If he'd had cell phone, he could have won it. He had told one of his generals, remember he's got corps now and not just one army, who was down southeast of him, says, I want you to take a left turn. He was going north. Take a left turn. I'm going to crash right into the middle of Wellington's English. I'm going to split the line. You're coming in behind me. The guy didn't get the word. Or he ignored it. Who's coming off the east coast of Germany? Oh, well, what's going to be Germany? A guy named General Boucher. Okay, sounds like something you light a fire to. But anyway, he comes down like that, and right in behind, he tried one of those maneuver derriere, only it wasn't Napoleon doing it. It was Boucher. He gets caught in the middle, Napoleon does. He keeps waiting for this, would you believe his name was General Grouchy? Grouchy in English. Anyway, he didn't get there in time. Well, so Napoleon lost, not because he didn't know how to fight, but because the coalition was strong and Wellington was no dope. He fought most of the time against generals who were aristocrats and dopes, but Wellington, as we all know, was definitely not. He was a great general. So anyway, there we go. So there you have it. So he abdicates, and the second time they say, we're going to put you way out of here. So they send him down to St. Helena, and it's right in the middle of the Atlantic. And you can't get back to either continent from there very well unless you had a real good boat. And the British are in charge. The British own St. Helena. Now, the French always claimed that the British were feeding him arsenic, and that's why he died so quickly. He was only 42. Why was he dying? Well, pining for Josephine? Nah, not really. Pining for becoming emperor again? Nah. I mean, he was writing all that time, wrote a long memoir, and which you can read if you want to, only 900 pages. But, you know, there he is, and so they exhumed part of his hair, and sure enough, arsenic. Now, the only problem with that is you could have exhumed anybody's hair, and out of any grave, and there would have been arsenic in it, pretty much. So it didn't prove anything. But the French always said, oh yeah, he was poisoned by those Brits. There's his deathbed. 1821, I got that right too. So that means that he's 42, I think, doesn't it? 69 to then? Okay. Now, fatal flaws. Have we been talking about his fatal flaws? Class inferiority. He always felt that those aristocrats and those emperors and those czars and somehow were greater than him, little kid from Corsica. So he says, I always have to win, because if I ever stop winning, I've had it. Which is true. He had money insecurity, and so that's as a kid. Remember his lunch money he's using to buy books? But he certainly had plenty of money while he was emperor. Intellectual envy. Although he could read all those great works, he always wanted to write like that, but he couldn't. Social awkwardness. I mean, how can an emperor be socially awkward? He always felt a little bit inferior to all of those people with the blue blood, you know. And that's sort of a lot of us are like this, hypersensitive to criticism. He never liked to be criticized. So when you put all that together, it drives ambition, and it also drives grandiosity, search for grandeur. Okay, so you're going to bury him, okay? So here we got to bury him. It's in 7 caskets, starting with lead, different casket, different casket, different casket. It's like those bottles you get in Russia, you know, with a little guy in the side, and there's like 7 in there. Anyway, 7 different caskets, the top one being mahogany. Look how huge that is. Now, when I take that picture, I'm standing over a big circular thing, and it's quiet. Oh man, it's got light blue lighting. Everybody's quiet. They're reverent, except for those crazy Americans who yelling and screaming and, you know, throwing popcorn and stuff. Anyway, so before he even died, they started to build an Ark of Triumph. You know, the Latin generals and, you know, Caesars and so on, they all had to have their Arc de Triomphe. Okay, so there it is. And everybody who goes to Paris, they see some people up in the top of that. That's a huge thing. You can see their heads up there. And inside it are all those 60 battles that he won are carved in there. Dates and where it happened. If you ride the subway in Paris, names of many of the stops are the old battles. You go to, and one of the train stations is Austerlitz. One of the main arteries is Rivoli, Rue de Rivoli. That's where all the fancy, you know, jewelry and stuff is. Anyway, so there he is, the bas-relief on the Arc of Triumph. Who's in it? That's the Roman citizen. He's got his toga on. Can you see that? That's worship for you right there, isn't it? Isn't that worship? So, now, you got 10 minutes to ask questions. And some of you were fed questions to ask, right? Oh, I guess it's supper time, right?
What's the color of Napoleon's white horse?
Allons enfants de la paix. No. Well, when he shot out from under him, you mean? They named it Josephine. Never mind.
Whatever happened to Josephine?
Yeah, whatever happened to Josephine? Well, you know, they divorced amicably, okay? She lived about, after they divorced in 1804, she lived 4 or 5 more years, and then she died. She's 7 years older than he, but anyway, so she died, and you can just punch that green button one time. Just punch the green button, because there's no use in this being on. You see what I'm talking about? That's the YouTube, and we might as well cut it off, because nobody watching YouTube is going to care about this. What was the question?